Dagda agus tá fáilte roh is mis an scéala beag. Hello, and you're very welcome. I'm the little storyteller. I'm coming to you from our Live at Five session there today, and it has been a very, very fantastic one. We've talked about the topic was divine comedy, and the idea of, well, not just the 13th century Italian poem, um, written by Dante, which talks about his descent into the realms of hell, which I actually only found out from Shane, a folklorist here in Ireland, may have been based on an older tale, an 11th century tale, possibly about a knight who turned up at a feast in Cork City and ended up falling over into a stupor and being left for 3 days, coming back with the vision of the other world or the hell. So that's a very, very fascinating twist to it. But what we were talking about was the idea of humor and how we interact with humor and how our gods in many ways or our divinities in our lives interact with humor. And from that, we got a question from our community. And the question was about a cultural awareness around humor. And so it was said that, um, I am paraphrasing that, if you kind of saw someone else being in a unfortunate circumstance, like some kind of misfortune befalling someone, it was best not to make light of it or best not to make a joke of it, because that would invariably encourage that scenario to come around and impact on you personally. Um, and it's a very, very fascinating question because in our talk, we touched on this idea of Schadenfreude, which I may not be pronouncing that word right, but it's this idea of taking pleasure in other people's pain or finding other people's discomfort funny. And that can be very common, like, at times. And unfortunately, it forms a basis for some very, very dark and very unhealthy types of humor, which is very prolific and very common in our society and needs to change. Any joke that punches down, any joke that you know, makes harm of a victim, like puts a victim in the place of the punchline is not humor in my mind. But this idea that, you shouldn't make a joke about something that happens because that might come around and happen to you. The question was, is there any examples of that in the Irish lore? Is there any kind of context in the Irish folklore that would support that kind of mentality? And it's a tricky one. It really is, because the Irish humor tends to be almost gallows humor. Like, we went through multiple, like, centuries of oppression and famines and horror, and it leads to this kind of almost gallows humor that exists within Irish culture even today. And so this kind of making light or making fun of misfortune on others, it can happen, but in regards to the Irish context and the Irish lore, it's a tricky one to go by, because in Ireland there is this belief that the other world exists parallel to our existence. It's known on Sail Ella, the other life. And any action here done in your day-to-day life can influence the other world and influence back on you from the other world. And within the other world, we have the She, the kind of the fey creatures of Ireland, and they are everywhere in our society and on our landscape. And so I would say yes, there is a possibility in context within the Irish She that if you are making misfortune or kind of making light or jokes on other people's misfortune, it might not always be a person that you're actually making light of or making like jokes against. And if that happens to be a person of the Dini Ella, the other crowd, the She, um, and you make fun of them, we know from folklore examples that that would 100% come back on you, not in the exact same way, sometimes in a lot worse situations, because you've infringed upon their honor, you've infringed upon them. There's stories of, young lads out walking along, and they see a horse in a field and they start like throwing sticks and stones at the horse, and they start making fun of the horse. It turns out the horse is like a puka, and it literally kind of grabs the children up on its back and races off across Ireland, traumatizing the children. But it's this kind of, you know, you have to be careful. You need to be aware of the way that you're putting out your words and your energy in regards to those interactions, because you don't know the harm or the impact it might be having on the other world back. Um, in regards to other elements of otherworldly powers, we have the destruction of Dod is hostile, which I've talked about in other sessions before, where a king has proved to be failing, and he's taken on this whole journey where he breaks all of his gesh and he's led to his demise in the other world. And so as within Irish culture, there is 100% this belief in otherworldly checks and balances, to such a degree that a king who was proved to be false and gives false judgment would generate not just doom upon themselves in some cases, but doom upon Ireland. The landscape would go to waste, and it would all turn to terror and horror because the person wasn't keeping right, or wasn't in keeping in sovereign balance with the other world. And humor can form a part of that. Other elements, other kind of areas that might help answer this question is from a bardic field, one that I've studied myself. We have a bard known as a Hearn, and he used his powers. He used his powers of speech to define what he wanted out of the world, and that was not in the best interest of the world. It was in the best interest of only a Hearn, and it worked time and again. Like he literally cursed a river and caused it to flood because he couldn't fish the river. He got no fish out of the river because he had no skill with that. So he cursed the river and caused it to flood. And so there is this influence on the power of words, the power that we have. And I have talked about it before as well. And my personal belief is that words define our reality. Our language, the words that we use, change our perspectives, and our perspectives is how we observe reality. And so if the words change our view, and our view is how we see reality, then the words in a way have changed reality. And so we have to be very careful. Me personally, I'm a gregarious person. I talk a lot and I like to joke. I like to joke around and have fun. But if my words do harm, irrespective of my intent, I have harmed. And so I would say that yes, there is a very strong kind of impactful, real balance, shall we say, or that comes from use of improper words or incorrect words in Irish society, in Irish culture, and from our Irish references. So I think Laura might have something to add on that.
Yeah. So now can you see me? Yeah. Okay. So just picking up on what John was saying there about the power of words. We think of poetry now like soppy English sonnets basically, or kind of romantic doggerel, or poetry gets a really bad rap, although rap is a much better way of looking at how the old Irish would have integrated words and poetry and rhyming, and the the emboss, the inspiration that comes. So rap is actually a very good modern example of I believe a descendancy of that kind of integration within a culture and within a society. And the Druids used to go against each other in ancient rap battles basically, right? But think of like rap battles but with magical elements to it as well, because you could literally raise marks on people's faces with the power of your words, with the power of satire. There was if a poet, if a fella put a satire against a person and it was a righteous satire, they would raise 3 marks on their face. And if it was not a righteous satire, if it was unjust, then it would rebound onto the phyllis. So the words were very important. And there's a whole section of magic and druidic magic that's actually called Rosk Caha. So Rosk is an old Irish form of poetry. It's probably it's the original magical language, I believe. That's just me, but just from the research that I've done. And Rosk Caha is battle poetry. So they would literally send the druids out before the army, and they would perform Rosk Caha, which cursed, and so it was throwing curses before any spears were drawn or swords rang out. So that's all a really, really important element that has formed a foundation in Irish society. And I'm not saying rap like as in American black rap culture came from Ireland, just to be very clear on that. Okay, it's the only kind of modern example I can think of that would hold a similar, because when you say poetry to people, they don't really get it, right? So, but even in modern times, like even growing up, we would have had a very common phrase called "mocking is catching," and I believe that actually, again, is a direct line descendancy. So to bring it back to Laura's question again, yes, that is a very common thing here where whatever you're saying could rebound on you very carefully, and it's that kind of righteous, it's that idea of if it's not just, if it's not righteous, if it's not warranted. So if you're just mocking, if you're punching down, if you're mocking for the sake of your own kind of humor or your own ego, or your bullying or power games or whatever else people mock for, it's going to bounce back at you. So that is a very, very strong element within our society. Yes, it's Rosk Caha, just from the chat there, ROSC and CATHA, Rosk Caha.
Mm.
So that is battle poetry. So I just wanted to contribute that, and I will put you back over to John now.
No, that's spot on. And as ever, anytime we hear Laura, it tends to be like academically succinct and like so informative, as well as just a delight to hear. Not that I'm biased, but I am. So I think it's important to kind of take on board that, this whole area of poetry and the whole bardic tradition and the power of the words. It is 100% part of Irish culture, and we do have references in the Irish lore. And so we, each of us, all of us who gather here, all of us all around, and anyone who happens to see this video after the fact, have a power within us every time we open our mouth, every time we write words, every time we kind of decide something or share something. We are empowered by the use of that. And so the question I would leave us with is, what are you going to do with your power today? Gurav Mahagas, thank you very much. Agus Slán. Goodbye.